So, by day, I work in science communication as Scientific Engagement Manager at the ICR. But my own superhero identity is that at night I become a science writer and an amateur violinist. There are many scientists who are also musicians, and there are many musicians who have an interest in science. There are several reasons for that, but I don't have time to go into all of those now. And I also don't have time to talk about all the overlapping fields between science and music, from neuroscience to sound engineering. But what I do want to talk about is how people who are involved in both music and science learn the basics of both fields. They learn how to be a scientist as well as how to be a musician. And some of these lessons are the same for both fields. For example, take good notes so that you'll remember what you did later. And that's something that scientists are a bit better at than musicians. But I want to talk about 5 things that I think scientists can learn from musicians. The first one is manage an irregular schedule. Now, as scientists, you don't have a regular schedule. Even if you get most of your work done between 9 and 5, and if you're lucky to not have any 15-hour experiments, you still come up to periods where you have converging deadlines or a conference on the weekend. You're here on a Saturday right now. Musicians' schedules are even worse because they often do music in addition to school or in addition to work. They learn early on that they need to juggle practice, rehearsals, auditions, and performances with the rest of their life. Dealing with setbacks, experiments not working, fieldwork fails, grant proposals rejected, your paper just not going through peer review. These are all things that you experience as a scientist, but you don't really have to deal with them until you're already working in a research group. And at that point, you've already been in school studying science for a few years. Musicians have to deal with their struggles much earlier, as soon as they pick up their instrument for the very first time. Practicing music can be as tedious and difficult and unpredictable as a very finicky science experiment, but you have to deal with it from the very start, and sometimes even as a very, very young age. Collaborate broadly. We just heard about the importance of collaborations in science, but it's also very important for musicians. Collaborations is what makes musicians get ahead. They get a variety of gigs, they bring in guest musicians, make new connections, grow their audience. Scientists are still tempted to always go to the same conferences, meet the same people every year. This, I have to admit, is my own regular conference. But for some of you, this is a new conference. So if you're here for the first time, then think like a musician and listen to each other, connect with people, and try to find some cross-genre collaboration opportunities. Understanding the job market. Now, a graduate degree in science, as you know, is not a guarantee for a permanent research job in science, but still a lot of graduate students are being made to feel that the job they're being trained for is the job that their supervisor had, even though that's probably the least likely job they'll get. Musicians are under no illusions. They would love to have a permanent job that's only music, pay the bills with music, but they know it's not a guarantee. And almost none of them will have been so misled about their career opportunities as a lot of eager early career researchers are. Finally, something that scientists can learn from musicians is to welcome keen and eager science fans. Musicians really rely on their fan base, and science needs supporters. And I'm not just talking about rich and famous people who fund entire research programs, but also the many volunteers who take part in citizen science projects, or the curious readers who somehow still manage to keep popular science magazines in business. But science is a bit unfriendly to outsiders. Papers are behind a paywall, papers are full of jargon, conferences are really expensive, and scientists are so short on time that they can't really afford to give a public community talk rather than work on something that more directly impacts their career. Musicians know that the best way to engage their fans, to keep their fans, is to engage with them, and they encourage non-professional musicians to work on their own music. And the link between a scientist and their audience is much more complex than that. But I think scientists also have to be more open and welcoming and remember that their livelihood also indirectly depends on people who care about what they do. Now, this was just the radio edit of a much longer story I'm working on that I don't have time for, but if you want to stay in touch, my Twitter info and website are up there, as well as a link to subscribe to a newsletter.